Yes, ma'am.
All
Yep.
right, perfect. Well, thank you all for having me this afternoon. As was mentioned, I'm here to talk about the ongoing Stormwater Master Plan project. So today I'm just going to introduce myself, talk about the project background and scope, and then give you all an update on what's been completed thus far, what's ongoing, and then what is the remaining tasks for the project. And then we can have any questions. But again, I mean, if there is anything as we're going, feel free to interrupt. I know I'm virtual, so um, feel free to speak up. It's a little hard for me to keep tracking both screens. So if there is anything, just make sure you speak up and I'll kind of hit on it there. So, my name is Amanda Hollingsworth. I am one of our stormwater project managers with Withers Ravenel out of our Raleigh office. I have over 10 years of experience with a lot of my kind of focus and specialty being on the kind of stormwater master planning, modeling, and analysis side, and then kind of the implementation of stormwater infrastructure projects for local municipalities. So, again, thank you for having me today. I will say these next two slides are a little bit word heavy, so kind of bear with me there. I was hoping that this would be a little bit easier as we were kind of virtual, and then if you guys ended up needing to read after kind of the update. So the project we're going to be talking about is a grant-funded project. The village applied for a grant and was awarded $350,000 from North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality, so NCDEQ, through their local assistance for stormwater infrastructure investment program. Kind of the shortened acronym for that is LASSI. So you'll hear the term the LASSI project associated with this. So this is a grant specifically for stormwater planning projects that the village has obtained, with the goal of this project to be to develop a comprehensive plan that, one, kind of collates all the information from existing studies that the village has done in the past or previous recommendations, and then provide some recommendations to improve conveyance during rainfall, and especially during the larger storm events to allow for faster recovery. So, kind of just a little bit of a project background as far as sort of what are the existing conditions. So, one thing is that the village approach to flooding, specifically in these larger storm events, is more reactionary than proactive. But the staff does desire to be more proactive, especially with this kind of planning project, and taking those necessary steps where they can to kind of be ahead of some of these larger storm events. However, a lot of the current processes that are in place that village staff have to follow are really dictated by regulatory compliance, um, specifically for, the waters of um, the state's environmental management for the coastal areas. And for example, there are the regulations from the state on like when water can be pumped and discharged into the regulated waterways. Um, Again, with some of the background here and things that we are considering and looking at as we get into the project, that there is a lot of that connectivity between the surface water and the subsurface water. That timing is a large component based on kind of how the quantity and the movement of the water in the aquifer and the subsurface water is through time, and as well as that during these larger storm events, some of the pumping activities and the approaches there are based on regulations from the wastewater treatment plant, and that can impact how the village ends up reacting to these large storm events. And with that, as I mentioned, there are a lot of previous studies and data that outline a lot of these ongoing approaches and challenges that we were provided, and we'll hit on um, as we get into the next slide. So for this project, the scope of this project was reviewing those existing studies, data, um, task force, anything like that that has been done in the past related to kind of stormwater management, flooding. Then the next step within the project was develop a hydrologic and hydraulic evaluation. So doing modeling to kind of evaluate in the technical sense where water is going, how much water is going there, and what are the resulting surface water depths. Again, this was a very surface water focused project, even though, as mentioned, we are accounting for the groundwater component. So this is different. I know the village has had some previous studies that were really focused on the aquifer and the groundwater. So even though that data was considered, this is again really surface water focused. The project also includes alternative analysis to determine some proposed concepts to help with recovery and reduce depth and duration of standing water after the large storm events. And we also have a programmatic improvements task in the scope, which is focused on kind of looking at ordinance language, public education and outreach, and looking at kind of providing guidance for low impact development is part of kind of that task. And then as we were going through this project, the village has gotten us under an additional task order to develop a floodwater management discharge plan. So that will be kind of the formal plan uh, with the state. So then, when there is an emergency and there is need for emergency pumping of floodwater to one of those regulated waterways, there's a plan in place to kind of help that approval process versus um, having to, request the approval every time. This will just kind of streamline everything, knowing that those practices would already be pre-approved with the state. And the project is going to be kind of wrapped up with a master plan report and summary of the existing or the previously described scope steps. So thus far, as mentioned, the first step was reviewing a lot of the historic documentation that was provided by the staff and trying to understand the existing infrastructure, the existing kind of connectivity for surface water. How is it moving? Where is it moving? And so, as mentioned here, this is kind of a quick list of the different resources that were reviewed. As you can see, kind of ranging mostly within the past 20 years and really just trying to use this as a starting point to one, understand what's been identified previously, what were previous recommendations, and use the information from these previous documents to kind of help guide one, recommendations in this report, and then two, any concepts that would be developed as we get to the alternative analysis. So that was the first step. We provided the village with a short memo, just of a summary of the highlights of the different um, resources and the findings from there. And I worked with them to identify and verify the existing infrastructure that was on the island and just making sure maybe what was constructed from a set of plans versus something that maybe was proposed but never constructed. So with all that data, the next step was developing a hydrologic and hydraulic model. As mentioned, this is really focused on the surface water, and we were really in this first step looking at sort of the terrain-driven water depths. In this stage, we used HEC-RAS, which is a model developed by the Army Corps to simulate different storm events. So we use kind of the standard engineering storm events as you would hear, like a 10-year storm event, 100-year storm event, 500-year storm event. And then we also had taken the rainfall from the PTC 8 storm and use that like true rainfall data from that storm event, ran that rainfall within the model to try to simulate what you guys actually saw on the ground to kind of help validate the model. And we also had scenarios that accounted for, tidal conditions that might be dictating the outfalls and where water is leaving the island, as well as potential storm surge. So with this, again, this was a 2D model, so it's run by basically simulating rain onto terrain. And then once the rain falls on the terrain, we are using LiDAR and topographic information where then the water kind of looks to see where it would move in different, based on where it falls on the island. And then again, if it falls into kind of a low spot, that's where you can kind of see where it's simulating that water is going to sit there. So again, um, this was validated with, anecdotal evidence in discussions with village staff, um, and really kind of use that PTC 8 to help validate where the main issues are. So you can see some of the results here on the screen with some of the flooding. And again, was a lot of these are kind of just showing the max. So even if they're kind of small depths, if you had rain on the location, it, even if it continues to move down, that's why you're seeing a lot of the blue and that, it's really just representing at that specific location, was there any type of max rainfall uh, that we saw? So again, we looked at both kind of at the peak, what was the max depth, and then also through time, after the storm and the rainfall stops, how are things draining and what's that residual flooding? So we use this as the base line. Again, the point of this was to mimic what you guys are seeing day to day, to use that as a comparison point as we move forward, and then work with village staff to select areas to kind of focus on for concept development. So where we are now in the project, we worked with staff to select a few areas to develop concepts to help, again, focus on kind of recovery, reduce depth and duration, specifically in the large storm events. Due to just budgetary restraints or constraints within the grant, we couldn't look at every single area that has flooding problems and flooding issues. So with that, um, again, we know that there are other locations that could use concept development. And as we go in the reporting, we'll note that there are other areas. However, in discussion, we ended up selecting kind of two main focus areas to develop the alternatives. And right now we're kind of working on finalizing those concepts and costs. So the two areas that were selected, this first one, concept area one, we are reviewing the infrastructure between Lagoon 17 and the emergency outfalls kind of on the southern beach of the island. And then the concept area two, we're um, reviewing the infrastructure on the west side of the island near Cape Fear Trail, near Lagoon 8. And I'll have pictures on that on the next slide here. But um, as we're working through concepts in each of those areas, we've run multiple alternatives at each location with different combinations of infrastructure or pumping, and we were comparing the resulting depths to the existing conditions at the peak, but then also kind of post-storm, looking at more of that recovery side of things. And while we were developing these, we've been looking both at kind of physical constraints as far as like what can really be implemented. Is there going to be any physical site constraints with implementation? Trying to make sure we're coming up with concepts that are going to be permittable, and that make sure that like once we move to implementation, we're not going to have any issues, especially on the environmental permitting side. Considering long-term maintenance, looking at anticipated costs compared to benefits, and really just kind of trying to come up with the most cost-effective solution that would have kind of the most benefit for the reduced cost as we're kind of working through these concepts. As previously mentioned, within our model, we do have, a groundwater component that is accounted for. So we do have that surface water groundwater interaction through kind of the different storm event and after the storm event. And currently, we are working to finalize these through the rest of the month, which would be kind of finalizing the concepts and then also developing preliminary costs. So currently, this is technically concept two, but this is that western side of the island. Um, Thus far, again, this is not finalized. These are not finalized exhibits, and we don't have finalized costs at this point. But um, in discussions with the village, this is kind of the current selected alternative where we are proposing gravity network along the right of way with inlets to try to pick up additional water and then move it to Lagoon 8, because there's that existing pumping infrastructure there to help then move the water out in a larger storm event, especially knowing that this is one of the areas that when there's larger storm events, staff have to go out there pretty early on to start kind of pumping and moving water. So trying to get some of this water off as much as possible. And then the benefit here is that we have infrastructure that's already in place that's a little bit, low maintenance. It's not as costly as having mechanical equipment to try to help with the day to day. And again, this is not finalized results, but when comparing to existing conditions, we were seeing about a 20-30% reduction in the max depth. And then, looking 24 hours after the storm, we were seeing about a 20% reduction in the post-storm uh, depth as well. And then moving on to the other area, which on the other slide I think was called Concept Area 1, as we're looking sort of on this area south of Lagoon 17. Again, the kind of current selected alternative is focusing on gravity network. Um, I will say that the specific locations of these like pink proposed pipes here are not 100% finalized, but are trying to minimize, um, disruptions or to anybody's
And,
particular property. Yes.
and yeah, could you do me a favor? Could you choose a portion of one of these plans and blow it up? I don't know about anybody else. I'm staring at this trying to read. It's small for
Is it
us.
pretty small? Okay. Let me see if I can, might have it open on this one.
Then rather
See if I
than
can,
I was looking at like this alternative number 5, rather than trying to look at it holistically, just
see if we can do
and some
this.
go, okay, the purple is this is what I'm proposing here. Green
Yep,
it's and just show us
existing.
so that we can translate your drawings fast.
Perfect. Yes. Thank you for stopping me. So yes, these purple lines are proposed pipes with preliminary locations where the sort of these boxes that you would see here would be like an inlet and or manhole. So again, kind of looking at adding inlets back on Cape Fear Trail at these kind of two low spots from a topography standpoint, trying to kind of maintain the system within kind of the right of way here, um, working to try to pick up and add inlets, north of the area and both south with the system then kind of collecting at the intersection and then moving towards the lagoon and then discharging into the lagoon here. And then the green pipes are existing pipe infrastructure network here where this, and then the red line is the existing pumping force main infrastructure.
So just maybe a more basic question. Forgive me. Does it sort of work that if you take water, once you're taking it out of the groundwater, so when you reduce the water, pick that point on the, where you had that inlet point that you first pointed to, so you can assume that some broader area around that inlet point reduces as well because the groundwater level drops. Is that correct? Forgive
Yeah,
me, I
so
just don't
the
really understand, how this stuff works.
yeah, so for this with this inlet, we're talking about like a physical inlet structure where the water would be collected from the surface. So a lot of this is very much the surface water driven. Um, However, with the component of the groundwater, um, we are looking at just to make sure specifically that, if we were doing the pumping, we're not over pumping, reducing it to a level where we would be concerned about like saltwater intrusion. Um, from what we're seeing, especially in these very large storm events, um, the resulting flooding is very much surface water driven, more in where the water is landing and its ability to move from that.
I'm
So
sorry, can I just interrupt you for one
yes,
second there? So just this, because this helps to understand. So if it collects on the surface, where it disperses to is into the ground. And what's happened is the ground is now saturated all in that area. And so you have it pooling in one part on the surface. So by reducing that, then you're effectively allowing the ground to absorb, continue to absorb water. Did I state that right?
yes,
Okay,
yes,
thank
we're
you.
trying to, yes, collect before, um, instead of letting some of it then completely either sit while it's waiting to get into the ground because the aquifer would be so high. We're trying to collect water in the actual physical
Yep,
stormwater
yep.
inlets before
Okay, all
it
makes
goes
sense
in.
now.
Yep.
Thank you. Yeah,
Yep.
thank you.
Amanda, this is Chris. Just to say, the water that you're seeing here is stacked up. Okay, the aquifer is so high that the surface water in the rainfall has nowhere to go. So what we do is we open up the emergency outfalls and we start pumping off the island and we start to drop that water table, the aquifer. And then this infrastructure here, once we get it to a certain point, that gravity will then start to take effect and get it to the lagoon at number 8. Does that make sense? Hear me?
I
You hear me?
I can.
Do you hear me, Jesse?
Yeah, I heard you, Chris, and I think that explains it for me. That's very logical and that makes sense. I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't missing something, but that's I think everything comes together with that understanding for me.
Is the green line that says Southwest Beach Emergency Outfall Pipe, is that already existing?
Yeah, the green
Yes.
outfall pipe
Okay,
that exists, and the red line. It's hard to tell between the purple and the red, but the red line is existing 12-inch pipe
it takes from the
from the 8th lagoon
road there
out.
base. Oh, from the 8th Lagoon out.
Right,
Okay.
we set that 10-inch pump up.
Got it. Okay,
With
that's
the
where it
intake
goes.
and the
Okay,
8th
all
lagoon.
right, gotcha,
Yeah.
gotcha.
Let me understand your explanation. Just so the stormwater piping and inlet box, et cetera, that really doesn't come into play until the water's already surfaced up and we're dealing with basically the overflow pipe. And so, yeah, okay.
What this added infrastructure will do by gravity is sort of handle
The last
the
layer,
last layer. Once we get it that aquifer down, the water
Yeah.
table down to a manageable level, it'll help facilitate that.
so that doesn't come into play at all until the lagoon's pretty full and the groundwater's already gotten up and now it's broken surface.
But we can't, but it ain't gonna help unless we can actually open the outflow off the island. Well, I guess the one on the beach, we can almost always.
Well, there are certain times where the island is wet. The aquifer is a little higher. In this area, generally speaking, it's the first sign that house on the corner of Cape Fear Trail.
Yeah, right,
I got it.
That is the first signal that something's up. So this will sort of help ameliorate that
okay,
from a gravity
Got it.
perspective
okay,
into the 8th lagoon.
okay. So it'll help at the beginning just by getting that surface water off into the lagoon. And then as it continues to grow, at the end of the storm, there might be some puddles there, but hopefully they will have a way to get away also.
Yeah.
They don't have to that. Others try
Once
going into the
we
ground.
pump the island down.
Right.
Then also, this area and West Bald Head Wine is prone to deep water flooding where we've got to sort of pump it down to get the 10-inch pump in there to horse it.
Oh, yeah.
So,
Okay, thanks.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, unless there's any other questions on this particular layout, I think the concepts, I can move over to the next one. It's the same concepts, just a different location, and a little bit of a different layout. And again, the specific layout and exactly where this particular purplish pipe is going to be. Thus far, we've kind of set them and trying to identify the lowest spots where, if water is trying to find the lowest elevation and leave, that's where it's probably going to be trying to go. Within our models, because we were kind of modeling it in a 2D scenario, and we were looking at the flow paths and how the water's moving. A lot of the water is kind of moving east to west, and even if it's moving very slowly, it's kind of finding its way through kind of this general flow path, kind of east to west. Eventually, some of it's making it into Lagoon 17, but again, with the same concepts is really trying to identify these low spots from a topography standpoint, trying to stay within the right of way as much as we can to try to collect some of the surface water and then move it through the kind of gravity pipe network into Lagoon 17, which then would have the ability with the existing red pump line here to then be pumped out to the emergency outfall. So I guess before moving on, were there any specific questions on um, these kind of proposed concepts? Okay. I'm going to move this to the side, and if we need to zoom in again, we can bring it up. Um, so pretty much looking forward as we're looking to close out the project. As mentioned, the concepts are kind of the ongoing tasks that we're working to finish up through the end of March. So kind of finalizing the technical modeling side, providing, exhibits, and proposing costs. So as of today, like we don't have the proposed preliminary costs associated with the concepts, but that is kind of forthcoming. And then looking at the remaining tasks within the scope, one kind of the main remaining task would be the programmatic improvement. So we just kicked that off with the village staff. I think about 2 weeks ago now, it was mid-February to kind of regroup on this. So this is going to include kind of a large public engagement education kind of strategy. Um, Again, we're in the very early preliminary stages of kind of planning this, but really kind of focusing on education related to stormwater. We're also going to be kind of reviewing uh, ordinance and then providing potential ordinance recommendations for ordinance language that could be incorporated, whether it's related to, development on the land to help reduce flooding on properties, also related to trying to focus on stormwater water quality as well. And that's kind of related to providing guidance on low impact development and strategies that, can try to help both manage quantity and then quality of stormwater if people are developing on site. So again, this is very preliminary phase, but we are tentatively kind of working to or planning to get something scheduled in the new fiscal year. So most likely July or August, where we would have kind of an in-person public education workshop or meeting that would also have a virtual component to that as well. But again, this one is still very much in the early stage, but that's kind of at least the next steps of where we're going is to try to tie all of the recommendations together and help provide everyone some education on maybe why the policies are the way that they are, as far as like what are the regulatory requirements related to the stormwater management the village must follow, and things that everyone could do from a citizen level to help um, kind of be good stewards of floodwater management. Another component of that is the floodwater management discharge plan for the emergency pumping. So to get kind of that pumping plan set with the state. So we've reached out to the state to have a little bit of a kickoff there to make sure we have everything that they require. And then as we wrap this up, we're going to be developing kind of a final master plan report. With all of this work, just with the grant funding as well, needs to be completed by end of 2026. And so most likely, working to kind of have everything wrapped up, or almost completely wrapped up by end of summer, just that way everything can be complete. And then there's plenty of time for grant closeout, and get kind of all of that final documentation closed out with the state as well. So with that, that was kind of it. So I'll open it up to any additional questions, and if I need to pull anything up on the screen, I can.
So just to emphasize the programmatic process on the low impact development is we discussed about should the village focus on regulatory versus education in terms of people developing their properties wisely and how and where they site things relative to the flood zone. And so we're going down the path of education.
So you're saying basically being able to show them based on historic data, this is, and your property, this corner of your property floods, so you probably don't want to put your house right there. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, we can already do that now.
Yeah,
But this low impact development would reinforce that to try to offer ways to not do that.
yeah, okay.
Now, does it also include, when you talk about ordinance, right, ordinance recommendations, does that come down to, hey, these, I love that you bought this piece of property, but it's not a buildable site? Is that where can that be in there?
I think we have to walk a cautious line.
No, I understand that. That's why we have will on. Yeah, right.
Right.
No, but there's a lot of,
Like suggesting that if the property is 5 feet or 6 feet above mean sea level, that it's prone to flood based on the studies and what we've seen. That if you have elevations on your lot, you can't build within that. Well, there's some properties that the whole property is in that range, so not sure how far we can take that.
I think one of the things that we're going to face is, as you know, people building on these lots because they don't know any better. And the builder's not going to tell them, oh, this is going to flood. I mean, we looked at a house back when we first moved here. We just happened to be here the day it was a giant thunderstorm. We went back by the house. It was a spec house. And it was completely underwater. The whole yard was underwater. Well, nobody told us that. And it seems to me like if we want to try to limit building on lots that are just not as desirable, we can provide some information that would allow people, if they knew it existed, to check before they come. If they come in the summer and hadn't rained in 6 months and they look around, they're like, oh, this is dry. I mean, all the beach lots look that way most of the time. But then when you look for the dark, you see some dark bushes in the middle of the thing, you're like, probably some water been there, at some point.
but it's a tough one, and I get it. Okay. Well, I don't think we have any more questions for you, Amanda. I appreciate the presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And again, yeah, thank you for stopping me midway. I know sometimes it's hard virtual to make sure we're all communicating as well as we would in person. So I appreciate you all's time today. And if there are any other questions, obviously the staff are in contact with us. So if there is anything else after this, feel free to reach out to Chris and team, and I'm sure they can pass that along as we continue to work through this project, especially as we get into the programmatic piece of it.
Okay, great.
So, thank you for your
Thanks so
time.
much. I think that brings the day to a close. Okay.